This is the Z CAM IPMAN S, a £137 wireless video streaming device aimed to be a versatile solution at the lower end of the video market. But what can it do and how does it perform? Well, today we're going to find out. The affordable end of the market has had loads of lower cost wireless video solutions released as of late, and the IPMAN S is Z CAM's attempt at creating a solution that looks to compete with the likes of Hollyland, Vaxis and Accsoon. When it comes to pricing, for a single IPMAN it is only around £5 more expensive than the Accsoon CineEye Air, and if you purchase two IPMANs you can get a TX RX set for just shy of £275, which makes it one of, if not the cheapest TX RX sets on the market. Anyway, let's take a look around the unit physically and get into some tests. Out of the box you get the IPMAN and two mushroom style antennas, and that's it. Not even a quick start guide or manual, which is a bit of a shame as this is quite a versatile product with lots of different use cases. The IPMAN itself is pretty small and only weighs 178 grams with the antennas installed. On the front of the unit you have a status screen for controlling and monitoring the unit and 3 buttons. You have a left arrow, right arrow and a function button in the middle. What is displayed on the screen is pretty basic. You have the SSID of the IPMAN unit in the top left, which I wish didn't move. You then have a Wi-Fi indicator and the battery voltage readout. When you get towards the low battery, the unit will tell you on the front of the screen. You then have the video format indicator text. This will say no video if the IPMAN hasn't got a source going into it, or it will say the format. Along the bottom, you have the channel you are using, what mode the camera is in, and then lastly an icon confirming if a device is connected to it or not. It will also tell you the amount of devices that are connected to it. You can change your channel by holding down either the left or right arrow button until the channel indicator starts flashing. You can then single press left or right to change your channel. If you single tap the middle button, it will bring up the firmware version you are running and the serial number of your unit. On the back of the unit you have an NPF plate, which unlike Z CAM's E2 series allows you to mount your battery easily without having to angle it on. When it comes to battery life, I tested an NPF 970 with one of our IPMAN and it managed to last over a full day, so power draw is pretty low and a smaller NPF should still last you a good few hours. On the top of the unit you have the 2 antenna ports where you can mount the included mushroom antennas. These are easy to install, just line them up and turn clockwise. You will need both antennas installed for the unit to perform at its best. On the bottom you have a single 1/4" thread with ARRI locating pins so you can mount the IPMAN onto different configurations. On the left you have both a full-size HDMI input and output that can handle up to 1080 60p max. The HDMI can be used as a HDMI loop-through in its TX mode or HDMI out in its RX mode. You then have a DC barrel power input for powering the unit. This is a DC barrel connected with a 2.1mm pin and a thread for locking connectors, which is a nice touch. We have used the Hawkwoods PC22 here, but any other 2.1mm DC barrel to DTAP should work fine. Alvin's cables produce a locking DC 2.1mm cable, which are around the same price as the Hawkwoods and also work fine, so if you need or want a locking connector, I would just grab one of those. On the right there is a USB-C port which can be used to do a range of things. You can use it with a USB-C to Ethernet adapter for connecting the IPMAN to a router, connect straight to a phone, which you may need to do depending on how you want to use it, and even connect to different cameras to control them via the Z CAM app. We will look at all of these use cases in a bit. One thing you can't do with the USB-C port is power it. You then have a switch to change the IPMAN between its 3 different modes, which are for it to behave as a transmitter, receiver, and M, which is the mode you need to do if you are wanting to connect your IPMAN to an existing wireless network. We'll explain how to do this later. Lastly, there's a physical on-off switch. So the body's pretty simple, but it's exactly what it needs to be. All the buttons feel decently clicky and responsive, and the switches feel good, especially considering the price of this unit. I also like that Z CAM haven't tried to jazz it up too much, it's just basic and it's exactly what it needs to be. A lot of these more affordable wireless video systems like the IPMAN use H.265 encoders and decoders, so image quality is an interesting subject. For these tests we wanted to run 2 scenarios, a mock live stream to see the quality running 2 of these would give, and then a Ninja 5 capture of 2 scenes, 1 chart and 1 outside, with the IPMAN, Vaxis Atom 500 and Accsoon CineEye 2 Pro. Let's start off looking at the Ninja 5 captures. For these, we ran the tests one at a time, starting with our chart with the Ninja around 2 meters away from the camera. We used the same camera and lens across all of these tests, an FX3 and the Sigma 24-70 DGDN. Looking between the charts, the image is pretty similar across all 3, though this isn't the case with our outdoor tests. We then did the same but outside to see if we could get some banding in the sky. Here you can see a clear difference between them, with the IPMAN being much softer and more compressed than the other two systems. Now this may have been the scenario and we have managed to get better image quality out of the IPMAN, but the other two clearly have a better image in this situation. For our last image quality test, we ran a little mock live stream with all cameras being fed into our local network and then brought into OBS and then streamed via YouTube. For this I have two IPMAN connected to my home network wirelessly, one with a feed from my C200 and one from a Pocket 6K. These are then both brought into OBS using the SSP plugin, which we'll talk about in a bit. This recording is captured straight out of OBS. The image quality isn't too bad, and in the right network conditions, connection seems pretty stable, even when connected wirelessly, which is pretty good. I want to run some more thorough tests when it comes to live streaming though, so let us know what scenarios and situations you'd want to see in the comments below. Before we get into the guts of what the IPMAN can do, let's take a quick look at some of the apps you may need. As of right now, Android support isn't great, so we'll be looking at the apps for iOS. This consists of three, two for iPhone and iPad, and one specifically for iPad. The Z Camera app and Z Cam Monitor are both for iPhone and iPad. I would download all of the available apps you can. The Z Cam Monitor app is what you need to use to connect to the IPMAN, and is more designed for just monitoring with stripped back features and a cleaner UI. This will be the app to use if you are handing a device to a person on set that doesn't need the features of the full camera app. However, the monitoring app still features a range of monitoring tools and allows you to record the feed in case you need to hand off a quick proxy. It also allows you to do basic camera control, which we'll go over in a bit. The Z Camera app will also allow you to monitor your HDMI source as well. But the big thing is that it allows you to utilize the direct live streaming capabilities of the IPMAN. It also features loads of great monitoring tools like the Monitor app. The last app is Z Cam Live. This is just for iPad and allows you to do a few cool things. It has been designed as an app for live streaming multiple Z Cam sources. You can add Z Cam cameras or IPMAN units by hitting scan and adding them. You can cut or fade between the different sources and even adjust the delay of your different audio inputs. Honestly though, for my time spent using this app, I find it inconsistent and buggy, and I would really struggle recommending people streaming using this system if you want a stream that is rock solid. Right, let's look at how to use the units and get everything connected. You can pair a TX to an RX together by powering on both units and then holding down the middle function button for 2 seconds until the pairing icon shows up. It will then automatically pair, and both the channel numbers should be the same once successfully paired. This can be repeated each time for up to 4 IPMANs in their RX mode. This is a really quick and easy process. When running our tests, I had to hop around with different channels to get the best signal performance though. It would have been cool if they had included a scan feature to see which channel was the clearest. When it comes to connecting your phone to the IPMAN in TX mode, this was challenging at first, but now I understand how. I can clearly show you so you don't have the same issues I did. As of the recording of this video, the IPMAN does not currently work on Android, which is annoying as an Android user. So this little guide will be around iOS. Before we get started, make sure you have the apps you need for whatever devices you are using. Links to these are down below. Unlike with previous Z Cam products, you cannot connect to the IPMAN via your regular Wi-Fi settings on your phone or tablet, which I find really bizarre. I really don't understand why you can't. First off, make sure you aren't connected to any other Wi-Fi networks in your phone's settings. Then to connect to the IPMAN, you'll need to go into the Z Cam Monitor app, hit the little wireless button in the bottom right here. This will bring up this prompt. Here you will have to type in the number part of the SSID of the IPMAN. This is shown as the name of the IPMAN in your Wi-Fi settings and is also on the front status LCD, like we mentioned earlier. So type that in and then hit the white arrow at the end of the text box to connect. Give it a moment and you should have an image. For me, the scan function beneath this box didn't work if you are connecting directly to the IPMAN. But if you are connecting to an IPMAN already on a network, the scan function works really well. One thing I noticed was the regular Z Camera app would not allow me to connect to the IPMAN. You have to connect to it via the Monitor app, and then you can open up the Z Camera app for live streaming capabilities. This is a really odd choice, and I honestly do not understand the design decision to not let you connect to the IPMAN via your regular Wi-Fi settings and then dive into an app from there. Hopefully this is something that Z Cam can fix, as this really isn't very clear, especially for new users. Just a quick note on something else I noticed while using the IPMAN in its M mode. You cannot load into the Monitor app and live on the iPad at the same time. You can connect to the IPMAN via either, so just load up whatever app you are wanted to use, but not both. Z Cam have obviously tried to make a versatile product with the IPMAN, and this means that there are several distinct ways you can use it. Z Cam have created several images showing different configurations, which we'll be referencing. But let's walk through the different modes so we can look at the different configurations possible with the IPMAN. In the IPMAN's RX or receiver mode, it's pretty simple. You can just connect to a TX, and that's really about it. One thing I noticed was that you can't have a phone plugged in via the USB-C and have an image output, which could have been handy if you wanted to live stream from that. When the IPMAN is set to its transmitter or TX mode, it can output to 4 different wireless sources, which can be a mix of IPMAN in RX mode or a smart device running the correct app. In the TX mode, the IPMAN is creating its own wireless network that you need to connect a device to. It will not be using an existing network in this case. This is handy if you are in a location that doesn't need the range of an existing network, or if that location doesn't have an existing network you can connect to. While in its TX mode, you can also output to a wider router or switch using a USB-C to Ethernet adapter. This would be great if you are wanting to stream using a computer, but also outputting wirelessly on set without connecting those other devices to the network you are connecting the IPMAN to via Ethernet. The M mode on the IPMAN is used if you'd like to connect it to an existing network specifically. This could be something like a home broadband connection or a wireless LTE hotspot. You can connect it either wirelessly or via Ethernet. To set this up wirelessly, you can do this by plugging your phone or tablet in via USB-C to Lightning cable. You can then turn your IPMAN on, go into the Z CAM Monitor app. There will be a new Wi-Fi icon in the bottom right. Tap that and you'll want to see all of the available wireless networks. Select the network you want to join, enter the password and connect. To connect your IPMAN via Ethernet, you will need to use a USB-C to Ethernet adapter. You can then just plug this in directly into the router or switch. Give it a moment and it will have an IP assigned. Once connected, you'll be able to see the SSID and IP address on the front status screen. Now that you're connected, you'll be able to access the IPMAN via a device that is connected via that network. So if you open the Monitor app on either an iPhone or an iPad, you can now simply scan and locate all the IPMAN on that network. This is a really good way to extend the range if needed, and also a good way to have people connect to it without having to type the IP on their device. It also means that on networks with more robust range, such as our office wireless network, which uses repeaters, it means you can view the IPMAN feed from anywhere in the building as long as you have access to the network. One thing I noticed when testing the IPMAN was when you're connected to a network wirelessly, if you powered the unit off and then back on, it will reconnect to the network you last had it connected to, which is a really nice little touch. When connected using either of the methods we just mentioned, you will also be able to get these into OBS. Z CAM have stated that you'll be able to connect them into Stream Converter, which is their piece of software. However, at the time of recording, this has not been updated, so does not recognize the IPMAN. We may do a follow-up video once this is out though. Even with it not working with Stream Converter, you can still get your feed straight into OBS using the available SSP plugin. All you need to do is download the OBS and SSP plugin that I have linked in the description below, install them, and then you can head into your OBS sources, find the SSP source, then go into the source IP dropdown, and you should see your IPMAN source here. You can then also change a few different parameters that you may want to, hit OK, and you have your source in OBS. While outputting wirelessly via TX or in M mode, you can connect via USB-C to Lightning and monitor via that method too on a phone or tablet. This will be handy if you are wanting to stream with a single IPMAN without having to connect a phone wirelessly to it. You can then connect your phone to a network or use LTE and stream using that, meaning you only have to worry about the connection your phone has instead of a wireless connection for the IPMAN too. This is also the case if you are wanting to connect the IPMAN via Ethernet to a router or switch. The IPMAN uses the 5 GHz Wi-Fi frequency range instead of 2.4 GHz. The 2.4 GHz band provides better coverage over longer distances, whereas the 5 GHz has less range but higher data rates. Couple that with the use of H.265 compression, it's obvious Z CAM have focused on image quality and low latency over range performance. Z CAM haven't stated any rated latency, and I think this was a smart move, as there are so many factors to latency. So we thought we'd run our own tests looking at latency all the way through our camera chain in a few different configurations. Different HDMI sources will have different amounts of latency. Here with our FX3 and Ninja 5, we can see that there is roughly 100 milliseconds of latency between the timer and the FX3's back monitor, whereas the Ninja has around 130 milliseconds of difference from the timer, so a 30 milliseconds difference between the back LCD and the Ninja HDMI output. If we then add in one IPMAN in its TX mode and another in its RX mode connected to our Ninja 5, we can see that the latency between the camera and the monitor plugged in to the IPMAN in its RX mode is roughly 240 milliseconds. If we add the phone connected to our IPMAN TX, we can see that it is roughly 180 milliseconds between the timer and the phone image. And that's actually pretty good. Honestly, this performance is surprisingly good, especially with the phone. To put this in perspective, when we ran our test with a range of systems and our C300 Mark III using an SDI output for our previous wireless video overview, link to which is below, we used a Teradek Cine7 4K and Bolt 4K LT750, and the latency between the timer recorded by the C300 and the Cine7 monitor was roughly just over 100 milliseconds. So if you can keep a stable connection to the TX, I really think if you're on a super tight budget, you could potentially pull focus in the right conditions. However, it definitely isn't going to replace zero delay solutions, but it really is impressive what Z CAM have managed to achieve, especially with the phone output. With the ability to connect the IPMAN to an existing network and then be accessed via devices on that network, I wanted to see what the latency was like while using this method throughout our office. For this, we set up a camera upstairs, recording another camera, which is pointed at a stopwatch with one of our IPMANs plugged in set to M, with it connected to our network over Wi-Fi. We then had a second camera, which we had roam with me and an iPad running the Z CAM Monitor app connected to the same network as the IPMAN. To measure the latency, we rolled on both cameras, clap synced in the studio, and then went to different points in the office to see how latency is handled. We walked down to our reception and you can see that latency is around the same as our test using the IPMAN in TX mode, connected straight to it. So around 220 milliseconds-ish, which isn't bad, but this may vary depending on your network conditions. We also wanted to see what would be better latency-wise, looping through the Ninja or through the IPMAN. So we ran two tests, one where the camera is feeding into our Ninja 5 and then looped out to the IPMAN S, which is then outputting to our phone, and then one where the camera feed is going into the IPMAN and then looped out into the Ninja 5. From the test that we ran, there was pretty much no difference looping the HDMI either way. So run it as you need to, or even better, run your own tests on your camera package first. Z CAM have stated that the range of the IPMAN is up to 100 meters line of sight. This isn't as much as some other options on the market, but at its price point, this is pretty standard, and honestly, all that is needed in this market. 100 meters is actually quite far, to be honest, and from our testing, a pretty accurate estimation from Z CAM. We tested the IPMAN connecting to another IPMAN in an RX mode, plugged into our Ninja 5, and then again with it connected to my iPhone 7 Plus. These numbers are rough, and your mileage will vary depending on your physical location and how busy the area is when it comes to wireless signals. When using my phone, I managed to get roughly 109 meters away from the TX, and at that point, the signal started to break up and get pretty glitchy. At around 161 meters, which is around this corner here, my phone completely dropped the signal. I then turned around and walked back towards the RX using the same path, waiting for the phone to reconnect. I had an image pop back up at around 110 meters. Next, with our RX and Ninja 5, performance wasn't quite as good. With the first channel I had it set to, it performed really badly, but I switched to another one and it performed much better. I got to around 82 meters before frames started to drop, and then it dropped out fully at around 119 meters. This performance is good, and I really like how well it reconnects on both the phone and the RX. I didn't have to dig into any menus to do anything to reconnect them, which is good. It just reconnected by themselves. I also wanted to see how the unit performed walking throughout our warehouse. We started with the RX up in our studio and then walked down a set of stairs. I was getting a decent quality and sturdy stream a good distance away throughout some pretty solid walls, which is pretty impressive given its short quoted range and price point. But again, this performance will vary depending on your shooting scenario. As a TX RX set, the IPMAN has some pretty stiff competition at its price point. Two IPMAN will set you back just shy of £275, which makes it one of, if not the lowest cost TX RX sets available. Two really nice options that we like just above it in price point are the Vaxis Atom 500 and the Accsoon CineEye 2 Pro. The Atom 500 is around £370 depending on if you want the basic or full kit, and the CineEye 2 Pro is pretty much double the price of the IPMAN, set at £550. Though this isn't too surprising given that it's a slightly different device to the IPMAN, aka a dedicated TX RX set with a focus on reliability and range. When it comes to line of sight range, the IPMAN has the lowest at around 300 feet, then the Atom 500 is around 500 feet, and the CineEye 2 Pro has the largest at 1200 feet, which isn't surprising given the size of the thing. We also wanted to see what kind of numbers each unit could achieve when it came to latency. In their TX RX mode, both the Atom and CineEye have better latency performance when compared to the IPMAN, with the CineEye 2 Pro having the lowest. 100 milliseconds or less will be hard for humans to notice, and anything above that we would start to perceive delay. So just bear in mind that these systems aren't zero delay, so for critical focus, they may not be what you need. General reliability is something that is really hard to put across after only using a unit for a week or so. However, the Z CAM has been difficult to work with at times, which really isn't what you want from a wireless video system. Take for example, while we were recording our image quality comparison. Both of the other sets worked absolutely flawlessly with no drop frames or connection issues at all. Unfortunately, in the exact same scenario, the IPMAN dropped out a few times and had graphical glitches. I managed to solve this by changing channels, but it would be great if Z CAM added some kind of feature that scanned for the cleanest channel when setting TX-RX connection, so you didn't need to guess which one was going to be the cleanest. The IPMAN is a new product from a brand that mainly makes cameras, so the fact that there are a few issues isn't unsurprising. But really, in its current form, the TX-RX function is alright, but if you want something that is going to be more reliable, easier and faster to use, I would seriously look at the Vaxis Atom 500 or the CineEye 2 Pro if you need slightly better latency and range than the Atom. The IPMAN is by far the cheapest and is far more versatile than the other units, and it works really well with the iOS and iPad devices. So if you want a cheap way to share an image via an app, it's the better option, but if all you need is a solid TX-RX, this may not be the best choice currently. So there are a few different ways you can live stream while using the IPMAN. You can do this with or without a computer, depending on what you need. Z CAM's camera app has the ability to live stream directly, and so does their iPad Live app. The big difference between the iPad and the iPhone app is that the iPad app can handle 4 inputs from either Z CAM E2 cameras or IPMAN equipped sources and features settings that are handy for streaming that we mentioned earlier. If you want to connect your IPMAN to the Z Camera app to live stream, you'll need to make sure to connect to it via the Monitor app first on the phone. Close the app and then open the camera app. You can also connect your iPad or iPhone directly to an IPMAN set to M or TX directly using the USB-C port. This way you can stream a lower latency image as there is no wireless involved, just HDMI cable to the IPMAN and then cable to your phone. Otherwise you can just connect to the IPMAN wirelessly as we've mentioned and stream that way directly too. Anyway, both of these apps and techniques will require you to grab the stream URL and stream key that all major streaming platforms will give you when you set up your stream. Just copy and paste them in and hit go live, and you're live on either of these apps. So yeah, it doesn't matter how you get the IPMAN into one of these apps, just as long as you do, you can stream. However, some people may require these sources to go into OBS, as this will be much more robust, flexible, and customizable. Though it will require a computer connected to the same network as your IPMAN. You can do this either wired using USB-C to Ethernet adapters for wired connection to a router or switch, or wirelessly by connecting them to a router. We went over how to do this earlier, but having the option to do both makes the IPMAN a very versatile live streaming tool. And for people wanting to set up a multi-camera live stream, these could be a pretty solid option. But this is something we do want to test more once Stream Converter has been updated to see IPMANs. When Z CAM released their EVF, we ran into some issues with what types of video signals it would accept. So with the IPMAN, I wanted to test a few different formats to understand what you can feed into it. Z CAM have stated that the maximum resolution the HDMI inputs can handle is 1080 and the frame rate up to 60 FPS. From our testing, the HDMI will only recognise progressive signals. If you chuck a PSF or interlace feed into it, it will not work. It will also not downconvert a 4K signal, so make sure you have your HDMI set to 1080p at the maximum. The IPMAN also has the ability for camera control. Z CAM aren't specific with what cameras this will work with. The only piece of information I got out of them is that it will work with cameras that use the PTP protocol. The camera control can be done through the main monitoring app that we've already looked at. It simply appears at the top left of the screen, and this will allow you to control aperture, ISO, shutter speed, and white balance. It's a shame that this is quite limited. One thing that would have been incredibly handy was a remote record trigger. Hopefully this is something Z CAM can add via a firmware update. When it comes to what cameras the control works with, we grabbed as many cameras and cables as we could and tried a few out, putting our findings into this Google Sheets doc, which we have made viewable via the link in the description below. When it comes to rigging the IPMAN, it does have quite limited mounting, with only a 1/4 inch thread with 2 locating pins on the bottom of the unit. But that's it. Now this isn't abnormal, but I do wish that they had thought out a bit more about how this was going to be mounted, especially onto monitors. If you want some recommendations on how to get one rigged onto your setup, let us know in the comments below, or get in touch with our team via the details in the description. When it comes to mounting the TX onto your camera package, this will really come down to what system you are mounting it onto. You can either grab a DTAP cable to power it, which on larger systems will be preferred, or grab a slim MPF to keep weight down if you don't have a DTAP source on camera. Personally, I can see the Atomos Shinobi being a solid choice for people wanting a bright monitor to pair with the IPMAN to be a budget wireless monitor setup. But mounting it neatly onto the Shinobi can be challenging. I really don't like using magic arms much, so I try to think of a way to power them both and mount it nicely. Of course, you could simply just attach the IPMAN directly onto any of the 1/4" threads on the monitor, but honestly, this is not a nice and robust solution. Let's try to put something together a bit more solid and not so top heavy together. We put together two setups, one that uses NPF batteries and one that uses V-locks. For V-locks, I think the most elegant solution is FX Lion's NPF to V-lock adapter paired with their Nano V-locks. However, here we are using a 45-watt Bebop Micro because we didn't have any nanos in. The plate will pass through power to the Shinobi and has a D-tap output, so we can power the IPMAN via the DC barrel input using a 2.1mm DC to D-tap cable, such as the Alvin's cables one that we mentioned earlier. We then had to think about mounting. A quick and dirty solution would be to grab some heavy-duty dual-lock Velcro and stick the receiver on the back of the V-lock. You can then easily switch the RX between your different batteries, but if the IPMAN does get hot, this may come unstuck. If you want something a bit more secure, things get a bit more difficult. One solution would be to put a cheese plate under the Shinobi that is long enough to get past the V-lock and then mount the receiver onto the cheese plate using either a cold shoe adapter or just a 1/4" screw or a long 1/4" screw. We didn't have a cheese plate long enough for this, but it was long enough to get past a medium-sized NPF. This actually makes quite a nice little setup. We also put a Manfrotto mini tripod on the bottom too, which makes a decent handle and is a great way to set the monitor down if you need to. I do wish that Z CAM had included some more mounting points like Vaxis have on their Atom 500 to make it more configurable, but building out something is possible with a little bit of creative thinking. If you're on a budget, this is a seriously usable setup. Let me know what monitor you'd use and how you would like to mount it all together down in the comments below. While I can't really see many people rigging an IPMAN onto a Ninja 5, we still did. For our testing, I used some solid dual lock Velcro attached to the front of the IPMAN and mounted it into the spot where the caddy or SSD slides into on the Ninja, so the antennas point out to the left. With a large NPF mounted on both the Ninja and the IPMAN, it was actually quite a nice setup to hold. All you'd need is a lanyard and you'd be sorted to use it as a very affordable director's monitor. You could even add the little cheese plate and handle that you mentioned earlier to make it a really nice handheld setup. Zilla produces not only great thin HDMI cables, which work really well with different IPMAN configurations, but they also make a NPF 970 battery that also features a USB-C input and output. This could be handy if you need to charge or power a phone or tablet in a pinch on set. Though I am quite impressed with the IPMAN S, there are a few things that I wish Z CAM had included. The first being how it works with Z CAM's existing kit, specifically their cameras and their EVF. Both of these have wireless built in, but the IPMAN does not work with them. It would have been awesome if Z CAM allowed the IPMAN to talk directly to the E2 cameras, so you didn't need an IPMAN on the camera as a transmitter. Same goes for their EVF. I'm intrigued as to why this isn't possible, as it would be awesome if it could have. I would also like to see an SDI version of this with cross conversion. I also suggested to Z CAM that they worked with Atomos or another third-party accessory company to try and develop a way to mount it nicely and cleanly onto the Shinobi 7 and 5-inch, as I think this could be a really nice affordable director's viewfinder setup. It would also be really good to be able to connect RXs to existing Wi-Fi networks, so you can output to a monitor without needing to be directly connected to a TX. This is kind of achievable if you connect the TX to an existing network using Ethernet and then just connect directly in TX-RX mode. Though what would be cool is if a single RX could look at the network, and if there are multiple IPMANs transmitting, output them all via a single HDMI output in a configurable split mode, like what you can do on their iPad app, for example. As I have come to expect with Z CAM, the included documentation on how to use the IPMAN is incredibly lacking, and I really hope this video has helped you understand what the IPMAN can do and how to get the most out of it. The Z CAM IPMAN S is a product coming into a pretty saturated space. It has good latency performance with alright range, is easy to power and mount, and is pretty versatile, all at a low price point. But it really doesn't excel in one area. Frequent disconnects, image quality inconsistencies, and a convoluted app-based connection system will certainly frustrate users, which really isn't what you want when you're trying to get your job done on set. I really hope Z CAM continues to develop and refine the IPMAN, as there is certainly a great product here. It just needs a bit more polish. Let us know what you think of the Z CAM IPMAN S down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe for all our future content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.